Welcome to JFK Live. A lot in the news, not so much in the JFK world, but I would say in the JFK-adjacent world, which is the world in which we live. War, anti-Semitism, Israel, Jack Schlossberg. We got a lot on our plate today. So if you have a question, comment, please put it in the chat, and we'll try to get to all of those. I want to talk a little bit about what's on my mind, which is the war. This war is an incredible thing. We are in eventful times. Think about it. I'm in Minneapolis right now, a city that has recently been under siege. And that's a very palpable sense here. The impact of the ICE operations in this city, you see everywhere and everybody you talk to. It's unusual. It's not an isolated phenomenon. It's something that's touched everybody. And now, at the same time that we have that, or that prospect of that type of action going on in major American cities, our government is bombing a major metropolis filled with ordinary people. They got a metro, they got stores, and we're bombing these people who pose no threat to our country. We had our differences with them, and we didn't like them, and they didn't like us, and we've had hostility before, but there was no threat to us. And so, that's the reality that we're living with now and are going to live with for a long time. So I'm just been, brooding about that, kind of doom scrolling, reading all the stories, it's awful. It's terrible to read about. And, we need to get our heads around like what's going on, because, and I've participated in this myself, the idea that this is a regime change war. No, this is not a regime change war any more than the war in Iraq was about weapons of mass destruction. That's persiflage. This is a war of annihilation, right? The idea, the goal, is to reduce the Iranian state to a failed state. Okay. And this talk about the Kurds are going to come in, and the Kurds don't want to take over the government in Iran. They want to carve out their own homeland in Iran, Turkey, and Iraq. So we're sponsoring a regime destruction war, which is just designed to make the country ungovernable, and therefore, in the eyes of Israel, safer. That Israel will be safer because of this. Will the people of the United States be safer? It's hard to believe for me that bombing a major metropolis that poses no threat to you is like going to make us safer. Why is this war going to make us safer? And, we don't see any coherent rationalization, explanation of why this has happened. We've got a lot of Americans stranded over there because nobody who was behind this thing thought, well, maybe we should prepare people, and we've got a chorus of people saying this is the greatest thing. We've heard that before, it's going to be a cakewalk, all the rhetoric we heard about Iraq, which is not to say that this is going to be like Iraq. This may be successful in annihilating the Iranian state and reducing a country of 90 million people to a failed state, and Israel and Trump may declare victory when they've done that. Is that a victory? Is that going to be a victory when we created a country of 90 million people that cannot govern itself because we immediately decapitate any leadership that emerges? That's the plan? That's success? But when you articulate, this thought that this is a war on behalf of, it's really much more in Israel's interest than America's interest. That seems pretty obvious. But if you say that, then you're anti-Semitic, right? Like Jay, a paid reader, wrote in and said, in very vulgar terms, that I hated Jews by saying some pretty elementary factual things about what's going on. And we haven't heard from Jay since I pointed out to him my extensive Jewish education, and I don't know what he was thinking. Is Jay Jewish? I think he might be, but he doesn't know anything about Jewish people, as far as I'm concerned. And he certainly doesn't know about any Jewish people that I know, you know. And that was a very formative part of my education. I was lucky to go to a Jewish school when I was in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade and had a lot of Jewish friends and loved Jewish culture. So don't accuse me of, hating Jews. That's preposterous. And it shows how weak the argument is, right? It shows how unfactual, how ad hominem the argument is. That's the first resort. Oh, you hate Jews because you oppose this stupid war. Well, so be it. People are going to say what they're going to say. But it is interesting because, I watched Tucker Carlson's monologue the other day on the second. And, the guy talked for 50 minutes about the war, and I didn't disagree with any of it. I mean, I'll put it up there. If you tell me, oh, you shouldn't listen to Tucker Carlson on the war, I mean, listen to it. I think that he was very cogent. He was very factual. I mean, he's a bit of a showman, and his other biases and things, become apparent in time. But this monologue that he had the other day, I thought was spot on. So I'm going to put that in the chat. And my friend Michael Kaysen, the historian, said, this shows somebody who opposes this war can be an anti-Semite. That's true. But that doesn't mean that people who oppose the war are anti-Semitic, in no way, shape, or form. So we don't know where this war of annihilation is going, but it's a very bad thing, I think. And the response that I got to my article, that didn't impress me. That's one thing. The second thing is, we hear a lot of explanations of this war, and here's where we get back to JFK, I would say. I mean, what's the danger that Iran poses, allegedly? That they would have nuclear weapons, right? Now, they're not close to having nuclear weapons. Our intelligence agencies were united on that. They were far away. They clearly had some ambitions and some capabilities. We had a treaty to prevent them from doing that, which Trump tore up. And so, we don't know that peaceful approach would have worked, but we don't know that, annihilating them, killing more than 1,000 people so far. Is that going to make us safer? Well, if there was no danger, how is this making us safer? There was no danger. There was no danger from Iran. People say, oh, Iran, a terrorist regime. When's the last time Iranians could be connected to a terror attack on Americans? I mean, as far as I know, it was 36 years ago. Khobar Towers, which was a housing complex that held U.S. soldiers in Saudi Arabia in 1996. And the Iranians set off a bomb there that killed, I think, 20 people, 20 Americans. So is there an Iranian attack on Americans in the 21st century? No, that's not the way Iran operated. That's not the way Iran made itself felt. There's some plots allegedly, some Iranians were going to kill President Bush, just like some Iraqis were going to kill the first President Bush. And, those kind of rumors, beware, just beware. Those things are easy to concoct and they've never been proven. But certainly, the bottom line, Iran posed no threat and was not a terrorist threat.
I don't agree with that.
That doesn't, the fact that the justifications for the war are completely bogus and are evidently bogus, that doesn't seem to be restraining anybody. Where does it go from here? Well, go back to the roots of the thing. What's the justification for this? The danger was Iran might have nuclear weapons. What's the JFK connection? Back in 1963, Kennedy said he wanted a nuclear-free Middle East because if there was an arms race If anybody got nuclear weapons, there would be an arms race, and then there would be many nuclear armed states, and then there would be the possibility of nuclear war. So what Kennedy wanted to do was make a nuclear-free Middle East, and according to that, he wanted to impose, according to the standards of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, on-site inspections of Israel's allegedly civilian nuclear facility in Dimona, in the desert town of Dimona. The Israelis didn't want to do that because they were secretly developing weapons there, which the US intelligence and the CIA had reports from US scientists who had been in that facility that that is indeed what was happening, that the Israelis were saying it was a civilian facility, but they were trying to obtain nuclear weapons in defiance of what Kennedy's orders. So that was a clash, a real clash between the US government and the Israeli government in 1963 over the question, would there be nuclear weapons in the Middle East? And now Israel got the weapons, in part thanks to James Angleton, and now has a monopoly of nuclear weapons and doesn't want anybody else to have nuclear weapons. And exactly the danger that JFK considered and feared, that there would be arms races or armed conflict over nuclear weapons, has come to pass. JFK's dream of a nuclear-free Middle East is dead, clearly. And his fears have been vindicated. It was a bad idea for nuclear weapons to be introduced. Once Israel had them, Iran, the other dominant power in the region, wanted them and made plans to get them. Israel regarded that as a threat to its existence and convinced Trump that that was the case. And now we are bombing Iran on behalf of Israel. To what benefit the United States gets out of that? I don't know. Trump and his people, they've got some eye on real estate in Gaza, and they want to develop some beachfront. Well, there's 1 million people who live there, and I know it's unfashionable to say it, but they're Arabs, they're Palestinians, they're human beings, they have human rights. The idea that they should be cowed by constant violence so that Trump and his pals can have a real estate deal in Gaza. Crazy, very crazy. But that's the world we live in. That's the realities that the Israelis and the US government are trying to create. So, bad news, what would JFK say? I leave that to you. What would JFK say about this situation that we're in now, the current reality of the
Turned
world?
down LeMay. This is what LeMay wanted to do, and JFK wouldn't let him. Right?
Yeah, no, it's a good analogy, right? What do you do with your nuclear superiority, with your military superiority? Do you use it to keep the peace, right? Peace through strength. You have overwhelming military superiority. Nobody can challenge you. Therefore, you don't have to do anything, right? That was Kennedy's idea of peace through strength, and he was a peace through strength guy. He used that threat of strength during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but he didn't think that military superiority was going to solve the political problems of the world. He had a strategy for peace. Now we have an administration that has a strategy of war. It has a Department of War. That's the point. They want to wage war, and now they're waging war in a country that has no defenses. I mean, how many non-combatants of the 1,000 people that have been killed now? Probably most of them are people who had nothing to do with this. People who didn't have nuclear weapons. People who were not terrorists. The 160 girls killed at that school, they weren't terrorists. Now we say, oh, there was a military base nearby. That's the excuse. Okay, great. We're coming, Netanyahu and Trump have said, we're coming to free you. Now you can free yourselves. And we just slaughtered a bunch of your children. So you should really trust us about your future. Do these lunatics think that that's like going to work? I mean, they clearly think it's going to work. It's crazy. It's brutal. It's violent. It's not thought out at all. And
No,
it's going to
they
go
had an
on. It's going to
opportunity to
go on
knock
for a
out.
while.
I think they just had an opportunity to knock out all that senior leadership, and that was the only thing they thought about.
Yeah, I think that Ken Klippenstein had who's a Substacker who I like a lot, with a lot of good source, good reporter. He said, we have this machine, and it's like you give it a target, there's no choice. It's like, of course, you exercise it, but it's a mad mentality to think that, oh, we'll just decapitate the head of another state because we want to. We don't like them. It's a country of 90 million people, Oh, let's just decapitate their leadership. And now the Israelis, I mean, this is madness. They pledge to decapitate anybody who steps forward. And this is the proof of the war of annihilation. This is not a regime change war, just like Iraq was not about the weapons of mass destruction. This is a war of annihilation. The design is to create a failed state in the area of Iran. Okay. And then that way, Netanyahu, I guess, will feel safer. You know, I mean, it's a nutty idea. And, I think most Jewish Americans, I think, don't support it. Most Americans, according to the polls, don't support it. Although, I don't know, we're seeing a lot of different polls. Have you noticed that? Some polls say it's 50-50, and other polls say three-quarters of the people are against it. So I haven't studied those, like super carefully. A lot depends on how they're worded. But we'll see. Is this popular? I
I think
mean,
they'll, I think they'll accept the Shah's son as a leader, but anyone associated with that religious group, they're not going to accept.
I mean,
See,
but you're assuming that like we're going to allow some group of leading Iranians to form and create another government. The Israelis have promised to annihilate anybody who does that. So, maybe that won't happen. And this Shah, this Pahlavi guy, I mean, he's a puppet. He's a puppet, just like Chalabi was a puppet in Iran. I mean, he's a creation of the West. He doesn't have any support in that country. His social media profile is obviously puffed up by bots. Um,
Well, apparently he's the one that urged those people to protest, the 30,000 people that died. I'm just saying that our government,
Larry, that clown in exile was not the person who convinced Iranian women to protest against having to wear the hijab. That's not what happened. Those women were protesting. They never even heard of that guy
he
at
only became
all.
interested. He only became interested in politics in the last few years. I remember when I was in college, he used to ride around my campus in his convertible Mercedes with, young co-eds in the back. He didn't go to my college, but I guess he dated women from there. I used to see him, and he's been a playboy ever since. And at the bottom line, not to be too theoretical, you can't install a monarch externally, especially if it's being installed by non-monarchies. It's not like the Holy Roman Empire, right? I mean, we're not saying, yeah, we prefer this prince to this one. You're going to install a new Shah.
that's what we did in the
The
19.
interesting thing about, and I just want to make one quick point. We often talk about the 1953 coup that overthrew Mohammad Mossadegh.
Right.
People always think that there was some kind of, a complete replacement of government. The Shah was there when he was overthrown. That was the last bastion of constitutional monarchy in Iran, was when Mossadegh was there and he was overthrown. And the Shah was essentially empowered to be a despot by
Right.
us. So
Right.
that's really what happened.
I'm
So
saying that
that's,
I think we're going to repeat that. That's what we would accept him
but he
as.
can't be a despot, is what I'm saying. He can't, it's going to have to come from inside the country. I'm sorry. I mean,
I was
first of all,
responding to
any
Jeff's comment.
externally imposed regime change is doomed to be a disaster.
I
I mean,
was
Jeff mentioned Chalabi or whatever. He's a good example. That was just a disaster. You can't do it.
I was just suggesting that that would be probably the one person that Israel and the United States would support. In light of what Israel said, that they're going to knock out anybody. I think if that person came in, they wouldn't. But
Yeah.
that's not.
I don't know. I do think it's appropriate to talk about this in light of JFK because we can see what happens when you try to do regime change and how nuclear proliferation is has not helped this region. And when having Iran bombed and causing all this confusion in the Middle East, it's going to create all these refugees, just like what happened with Syria and Iraq. And what happens is Americans create crises in the Middle East, and they don't face the consequences of their actions by absorbing all the refugees they created. So Turkey has to absorb over 1 million refugees from Syria, and then Germany absorbs 1 million refugees from Syria, and then they creates tension and problems in their countries. And I'm wondering if that's also part of the intent. They want to destabilize Europe and ruin their democracies.
I think the intention is to destroy Iran as a state. And, if there's negative consequences for Europe, well, that's not Bibi Netanyahu's concern. I think it's that simple. Yeah, because those secondary effects, what would you do if Russia started bombing your city, right now in the next week? What would you do? You would go somewhere, right? You would leave. So that's what people are going to do. They're going to leave Iran, and it's going to create problems for the entire region. They're promising that this is going to go on for weeks, and
Yep.
after saying there would be no boots on the ground, now they're saying, well, maybe there will be boots on the ground. So we have that mission creep because, there's no way for anybody to impose their will on Iran without, coercion from the air. One of the interesting things that people are pointing out now is, in the history of modern warfare, where people think that bombing a country can change its leadership, I mean, the historical record's very clear. It pretty much always fails. It just doesn't work. I mean, in Vietnam, we were so impressed with our own technological superiority that we couldn't imagine that it wouldn't work. And we just kept on bombing and bombing and bombing, and it kept on not working and not working and not working, So, now we're in a different technological age now. Now we have what we've seen recently is, the ability to decapitate a government. And the Israelis are clearly intent on decapitating any Iranian leadership that is not subservient to them.
I think the only time it worked, Jeff, was World War II. With Nazi Germany, we bombed all the cities and firebombed them, and it's probably the only analogy that one.
But that's not what caused the defeat. What caused the defeat was the Allied and the Russian armies closed in on Berlin. The firebombing of Dresden did not cause the Nazis to capitulate. It did not.
Well, I'm saying that's the closest analogy to.
Yeah.
Did you see that Bondi was getting called before Congress for Epstein?
Yeah. So, the continuing Epstein saga, clearly Trump has removed a lot of material that implicated him, incriminated him, and people are going to have to, be held accountable for that. People say, oh, well, Trump did this because to distract from the Epstein files. I mean, it helped. I think he would have done it anyway. I don't, but he does need a distraction because, and he needs to get his base to move on to other issues, which, I think will work to a certain extent. Countries at war, people are going to rally to the flag. Who likes the Iranians? We'll get, tons of propaganda about how they were out to kill Trump, which is nonsense. How they've killed Americans, a long time ago, not true. And, and the, the propaganda around the nuclear program, that they were close to having a nuclear weapon, which even our own government, even Tulsi Gabbard, said was not true. Let's take some comments. Robert Morningstar.
Thank you for the invitation. It's good to make contact. I think that what we're going through right now is the direct consequence of the JFK assassination, and that it's part of the plan, long-term plan to expand Israel beyond its immediate borders, and that because they killed JFK, they've had a gun over the head of every president since that time. And you said that they have a plan to decapitate governments that displease them, and ours is no exception. I believe that President Trump is walking a tightrope under the gun, and all of these assertions. It was Iran who tried to assassinate him twice, in connection to the two attempts on President Trump, really point the finger at Israel. And it's maybe people have a short memory, but a couple of weeks or a month after the invasion by Russia of Ukraine, Zelensky said Ukraine is going to be part of the greater Israel. And the reason this claim is made is that the Ashkenazis have discovered through DNA analysis that their original homeland is actually Ukraine. And again, it's no coincidence that Benjamin Netanyahu's original family name was Milikowski. His father, Ben Zion Milikowski, was born in Ukraine, and he was closely allied with the most savage of the Zionists, a man named Jabotinsky. And Jabotinsky's philosophy, if you can call it that, as a communist, was just to seize whatever you want, kill whoever has it, take it, own it, and answer to no one. So Jabotinsky's philosophy was imbued by the father, Ben Zion Milikowski, into Benjamin Milikowski. And
yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with some of this history, and I think that's it's very sound, that influence from Jabotinsky to the Netanyahus to Netanyahu, and
yes.
so I mean, I had not appreciated the extent to which the idea of Israel, the idea of their 7-front war, that has come to pass. I mean, no doubt about it. Netanyahu's off on this kick of, he's the king of the Jews.
Right.
Like
You're
the world we
right.
knew, where we pretended that we, the international,
Wesley Clark,
the rules-based order, that's gone, right?
Yeah. Wesley Clark warned us about this. He found out about the plan long ago, and he was, sounding the warning. And so we have to extricate ourselves from the grip of this octopus. It's external, it's internal, it's menacing. I heard one of their advocates, they speak in ridiculous contradictions. One Israeli is advocating for control of social media. He said we have to control the First Amendment in order to save it. And statements like that just go in one ear and out the other, and people don't realize the inherent contradiction. And that's how they speak, and that's how they negotiate, by contradiction. I'm a person who has a very long memory, and I don't trust the Israelis as far as I can spit, because I remember the treachery of the attack on the USS Liberty. And even Nixon said, they turn on you. So right. I'm speaking very frankly to all of us and to all the members about that.
Thank you, Robert. We've got a lot of people who want to comment. So
Sure.
Let's go next to, we'll come back to that, Robert. Robin Yapel.
I'm curious as to how much discussion there's been about Johnson's shift in his relationship with the US-Israeli relationship after the assassination. And was there any relationship that we know of with Johnson and Israel prior to his presidency? Is there any sort of, I mean, obviously with the USS Liberty, um, he was president then, but aside from that and the additional aid, but
Yeah, I mean, U.S. policy changed from
dramatically,
Kennedy to Johnson.
absolutely.
Kennedy was serious about enforcing on-site inspections.
Yep,
Johnson didn't really care. So,
right.
that transition, that's very clear. I want to address the people in the chat who are saying this is like the protocols of the elders of Zion. It's not. It's not like that. We're not smearing Jews here. We're not inventing anything about
We're
Jews.
talking
We're
about a
talking
government.
about Israeli policy. So I wanted to be clear on that. So but back to your question, Robin. There was a clear change in policy, between Johnson and Nixon. And after that, the environment for nuclear proliferation in Israel was more permissive.
I guess I'm wondering, would the Israelis have had any way of knowing what they were getting with Johnson prior to his presidency?
Uh, you know, I don't know, what did Johnson say about the creation of Israel in 1948? Did he have a position? Maybe if people know something, they can put something in the chat. I don't know. I don't believe that he had any strong,
Because it's a
feelings
big
on
gamble,
Israel one
right?
way or the other before he became president.
But I mean, see what I'm saying? Like if Israel was behind the Kennedy assassination, and that's obviously an if, um, but if they were, that's a big gamble to not know what you're getting
Yeah,
in place of Kennedy.
did hypothetical Israeli plotters against Kennedy have hypothetical thoughts about Johnson? I mean, you're in the realm of like, who knows?
Well,
I can't comment on something like that.
I guess what I'm trying to say is if we're going to start saying that Israel had a motive,
I'm not saying that.
I know, but I'm just trying to explore it and just flesh it out. That's all.
Okay.
I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm wanting to flesh it out.
Yeah, yeah.
All right,
Um,
that's all. That's all I've got.
thanks, Robin. Josh Schoenfeld's had his hand up for a while.
Yes. Good evening.
Hi.
Regarding the war that the United States and Israel have launched against Iran, I believe certainly in the short run it's about appeasing the Israel lobby and also both extreme Christian and Jewish Zionists. But I was starting to think in the long run, I wonder if the United States decided to join in on this war as a way to undermine China, because Iran is a major producer of oil and natural gas. And this war might be a way to deprive China of energy that it needs.
Yeah, no, I think that, is that a motivation of Trump? Maybe at a secondary level, I think, but, is that a motivation of people who say, well, this war is okay because it's a kick in the butt to China? you know, maybe, you know, I don't think that's Trump's motivation. I think Trump's motivations are more primitive and his calculations are more primitive than that. Um, but yeah, we live in a great powers world, right? The great powers now, basically the idea of the illusion that people would follow international law, sort of voluntary agreements, that's out the window, right? Arms control, we're not going to do that anymore.
International law is dead.
Regard any international law, who cares? So in that sort of lawless world, yeah, it's a competition for resources. And China has voracious, energy demands because they're so big. But how, is China's, I mean, I don't know the answer to this question, would the end of Iranian energy harm China's GDP, in the long run or the short run? China for the last 20 years has been really seeking to industrialize and develop that whole region from China through Central Asia with the Belt and Road Initiative. And, they've invested, huge trillions of dollars, in building up ports, buildings, highways, railroads, energy facilities, not just in China, but with partner countries, as a way of creating new markets for China, and new influence for China. Is the Iran war going to hurt them? I would think Iran looks at this thing and thinks, the U.S. is an empire in spasms, uh, uh, spasmodic violence, uh, with, huge problems at home, right? I mean, if I think viewed objectively, wouldn't you say that the United States is a much more unstable country than China? A
I
less
agree with that
vulnerable China?
because
No?
China doesn't go around causing all these wars and committing either war crimes or genocide. I believe China is a more responsible world power than the United States. For example, China helped, I believe, broker Saudi Arabia and Iran to resume diplomatic relations. That's something that the United States would have never done because the United States is greatly influenced by both Israel and which would also include both Christian and Jewish Zionists.
Yeah. Yeah. And, another thing is, like Saudi Arabia, you bring up these Gulf countries. I mean, we've plunged them into war, with one of their neighbors. And how's it in their interests? I mean, now Iran is attacking them. So, of course, they're, enraged about that. But, they didn't ask for this conflict. This wasn't their solution. And now they're paying the price. And so, well, we'll see how it turns out. Let's hear from somebody else. Dave Lavara.
Jeff, I got to take some exception to some of the things you've stated. And I too, as a Italian American Catholic, was raised in the bosom of Jewish friends and associates, and many of my law partners have been Jewish. In fact, I was going to write a book, Conversational Yiddish, for anybody who was aspiring to have success in the fields of law, medicine, and organized crime. So
I have a short a one pager on that.
Yeah.
So
and to get ahead in those professions, you need a little you need a little Yiddish.
you need a little Yiddish, yes.
You need a little chutzpah.
Well, gelt. You got to know where the gelt is.
Yeah.
So I agree with you that the United States' primary interest should be the United States, and I think sometimes the lines get blurred with influences. I don't think Trump is the kind of guy who would take a backseat to Netanyahu. It's just not his personality. I think he sees a similarity of interest. You cannot dispute, Jeff, the hundreds of thousands of Iranians who are celebrating the fall of these nuts over there in the government.
And you remember the hundreds of thousands of people who celebrated the fall of Saddam Hussein? Remember how that turned out?
Yeah, I know, but Iraq is not the same. Iraq is a developed country. They will be able to come back and put together a government. I don't know who it's going to be, but you have a very sophisticated population in Iran. And I would venture to say that 90% of the Iranians were against that government who live in Iran, not to mention the hundreds of thousands, maybe a millions who are living in exile, self-imposed exile. So I'm happy they're gone. I think the world is safer with them gone.
What was the threat to you, Dave?
Pardon me?
What was the Iranian threat to you?
They were
How
a
did they
constant
threaten
threat.
you?
They were a constant threat.
To you?
To America, yes.
And which American, when did they kill Americans?
Well, we don't know. You give them time, they were going to do it.
No. I'm asking, you said that you were threatened by them. So you said they were killing us. So when? When did they
No,
kill
I'm saying
Americans?
they were always a threat.
Okay,
They
but
were a constant threat.
when did the threat manifest itself? When did they kill
49
Americans?
years ago.
When?
49 years ago when
49 years ago they killed people. So we're going to war with them now because they killed some people 49 years
listen
ago?
to their rhetoric, Jeff. Listen to the way they
Rhetoric
talk.
is fine. You know, rhetoric doesn't threaten me. A lot of people say bad things about America. That's not threatening. That's not a weapon. Words aren't violence. That's like a canard of the campus radicals. Words are violence. The Iranians said mean things about us, therefore we're threatened? No, that's not serious, Dave.
Look, why do we support Ukraine? Certainly, uh, uh, Iran is more of a threat than Russia is.
No, Russia has nuclear weapons pointed at us. Does Iran have nuclear weapons?
I bet they did before June.
Hey, Dave,
Who thought that, Dave? Who thought Iran had nuclear weapons? Not our intelligence agencies.
They were close to it, Jeff. They were very close to it. And I'd rather
The
we
U.S.
take this
intelligence
position
estimate was that they were
than
10
sending $1
years
billion
away.
of cash in a plane over to Iran like Barack Hussein did.
That never happened.
What do you mean it never happened?
We didn't
No,
send
it did happen,
planefuls of
but Dave,
cash over.
it did happen. We sent them the money. It was their money. Okay, those
Oh boy, I can't hear.
assets. So in order to get them to limit their nuclear program, we gave them back their money. It was a deal. Like we got something out of it, they got their money back. That's the deal that Trump rejected. They were not close to a nuclear weapon. No intelligence agency said that. The CIA didn't say that. The DIA didn't say that. The Israelis' intelligence didn't say that.
weren't the Iranians funding the fighters that were fighting our troops in Iraq? I'm just curious. Weren't they part of?
Yeah, they they funded the militias in Iraq who fought side by side
That's
with
correct.
U.S. forces and Iraqi forces against the Al Qaeda fundamentalists. So don't forget, in the war against ISIS in Iraq, the U.S. and Iran fought on the same side. Okay, remember that, Dave?
I don't.
Same
I'd like to see
side.
some of that.
It
Put it
was
up the
the
next
Iranians
column.
and the Americans who drove the Al Qaeda out of Western Iraq and crushed ISIS. And then we proceeded to turn on them after they had done that good deed and destroyed them.
Can I conclude with just one thing? It's unrelated. It's related to the Kennedy assassination. I think before you jumped on, Jeff, I was looking for the name of the Dallas police captain who was claimed that he was the kill shot on the grassy knoll. His name was
Roscoe White.
Roscoe White. Yeah, and his nickname was Mandarin.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I never knew what to make of that story, except that in the end, I didn't quite believe it.
It's starting
we
to
got
get
some
some
other people
air
who want
on
to
the
talk.
pods.
Dave, thanks for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Bruce de Torres.
Oh boy.
Hi.
Hey, Ion.
There's two there's two things. Mr. Chad Nagel, you gave such a great answer to so many things in so many of these, but back in November, this is such a Hail Mary. In one of these, in the second half, I basically framed it or stumbled into asking you, well, and I've studied this, like how would you describe what the country has lost or how it's changed since JFK's assassination? And you gave like a 13 or 14 minute, like from the heart, because it kind of surprised you, you know. Every week since then, I've been meaning to dive back into these things, find that, lift that, do something with it, pirate that segment. There's no chance this is ringing a bell, is it?
I'm afraid it isn't really. I mean, I would, if I go on for longer than 3 minutes, it starts to register that I'm rambling really badly. So the idea of going on for 13 or 14 minutes, um, but I mean, the thing that always comes to me, I see, in the universe of JFK assassination researchers, which is on the whole, I think we could agree, you know, it's a diverse group politically, but it has a kind of a left of center kind of core, I think, politically, if you could give it one. And I'm sort of a boring old constitutionalist. I mean, that's sort of where I fit into it. So I didn't really care what JFK's politics were. I think he was a brave guy. I think he believed, and I didn't agree with everything he did, but I don't care. He could have been the worst president ever, and he wasn't. But he was removed in a way that I think, you know, you can't deny that because we really don't know what happened, there was some mutation that happened then. I mean, I don't know a better word for it, but something about our polity, the American polity, was mutated when he was removed from power. So, and by the way, we're talking about regime change in Iran. And the only regime change that we're really talking about is what the US is now openly talking about, which is an external regime change, which I don't think ever works. But you see, the regime change in America really was internal. I mean, I know that we've gotten into this Israel did it type of thing, but you know, I always say to myself, look, suppose there was a Mossad hit team that infiltrated the United States somehow and, you know, whatever, positioned themselves in Dealey Plaza and did that. You know, I mean, if there was involvement, it's still down to our institutions. It's still, you know, it's still, the buck should really stop with our institutions that are responsible for protecting the institutions of state. And that includes the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service, all these federal agencies and military intelligence that, you know, that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to guarantee the security of state institutions. So they didn't do that. So, I mean, I don't know, you know.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's really my, before I start.
That's a very good point, Chad.
Yeah, and I was truly fishing to see, like, I just want now, and thank you for your.
That wasn't it, was it? I said something else last time.
No. See, there again, it's your wisdom and your perspective, and from your study of it, it reminds me of two things: the sense of tonight as I've been listening, which is so easy for a man as old and tired as I am, to just see that horror in 1963 permanently altering us along these lines. And then there's going to be lots of optimism before the end of this whole evening. I've just begun reading James Douglas's new Martyrs to the Unspeakable. And it all came back to me, the soul, there's no other word, the humanity, the compassion, the heart, that's really in every sentence. And it's just this overwhelming impression of, you know, getting right moment to moment with how high the stakes are because of how far gone we might all be. All that to ask, whom among us has read that book and what do you think of it?
The new book?
Yeah.
I confess I haven't, but I'll just quickly say this before somebody who has says something. It's James Douglas is a Catholic theologian. So, I mean, he really infused the first book, which of course I did read, with a lot of that kind of pathos. But the new book is about the four assassinations that were high-profile political assassinations in the 60s taken together. I think that they really, you know, it really was a watershed over whatever, you know, 5 years that, you know, put us on a new kind of political trajectory. But now someone who's read the book can
I
say
read
something.
it. I think he had some really good. The continuation of his first book was good. I'm not sure about. I don't know about Martin Luther King to opine on what he wrote about him. much less Malcolm X. But the Bobby Kennedy and the John Kennedy stuff resonated with me to some degree. Martin Luther King, but I can't talk about Malcolm X.
Yeah, I read the book, and so he recapitulates JFK and the unspeakable, and then he deals with the other assassinations. So of course they're treated at less length, and so it's not as comprehensive as the first book, But to me, he's a very persuasive writer. I think partly for the reason that Chad said that it's infused with a moral sensibility. This sort of liberation Catholicism, I think, is the tradition he comes from. And so it's really well thought out. It's really ethically argued. And so, are those four assassinations tied together to the same force? I mean, over time, I've come more and more to believe that, although exactly how that worked, I don't know. But I thought, he makes the case as well as anybody. I would put it that way, Bruce.
I highly recommend it. I'm only 80 pages in or something like that.
Yeah.
And thank you for all you guys do every week here.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. Sorry, I want to go back to Iran, and I want to make some comments about the regime there, and I want to say this as I'm guessing probably the only person in this forum who's actually spent time in Iran, and I mean traveled very extensively to every corner of Iran. And when you talk about regime change in Iran, and you say in particular that's because you object to the current regime, what you have to take into account is that the current regime is the result of American regime change operations. Okay? It may be blowback. It may not have been a policy intention to install this kind of regime, but this is what American policies throughout the 50s, 60s, 70s ultimately led to in the form of the revolution. And the reason it's taken this weird shape is because this weird fundamentalist, conservative, religious quality is because America worked assiduously to destroy all of the other institutions of civil society. So, everything from the Chamber of Commerce to trade unions, to socialists, to communists, to, all of the institutions of civil society. So that the only thing that was left was religious organizations. So that was the only form that some kind of resistance, revolutionary resistance to the murderous regime of the Shah could take. And I just had one final comment to this. No one in their right mind thinks that this regime is desirable. The one thing to consider is, in 1979, the Iranian people fought really hard against massive odds to install this regime. They might not like it, but what they're saying is it was preferable to the regime that was installed under the Shah by the Americans. So, yeah, be very careful when you talk about regime change operations, because especially when you're implementing bad policies that are predicated on an absolute lack of historical understanding of the area, of the region, you never know what you're going to get.
Mm-hmm. So, John, and you traveled widely in Iran?
Yeah, I've been there about 3 times. I never intended to. I was traveling in other countries in the Middle East, and I was planning. I only ever went to Iran as a kind of transit, but then one thing led to another, and I ended up spending a lot of time there. And so I can say, I mean, I've been detained by the secret police in Iran. I was detained 3 times. To be honest, I didn't really know what to do with me. And in most cases, these kinds of secret police, they're kind of embarrassed because they don't know what to do with you, but they don't want to be responsible for you if something happens. So yeah, look, it's a strange place, but it's a much bigger and more diverse country than you're being led to believe.
Yeah, that's for sure. Thanks. Mark 10 pass.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
I wanted to know what you make of the theory that maybe there's a bigger, geopolitical quid pro quo going on with all of this. I mean, we recently took out, El Mencho in Mexico. We also, picked up the president of Venezuela recently. There's been some reporting by Oscar Ramirez that the IDF was actually providing training a couple of years ago to some of the Latin American cartels, including in Mexico. And we do have a history of a relationship between our deep state, the CIA, some of the Latin American cartels, and even Mossad with Iran Contra. So I was wondering, do you think that maybe the trade here could have been, hey, you help us, take out El Mencho and get some control over the drug and human trafficking situation, and we'll help you guys out with Iran.
No, I don't think that's what's going on. I mean, we have a big, drug enforcement industry. We know, we have some idea of how these cartels work. We take out, Pablo Escobar, you name it. The kingpin strategy does zero to affect the supply and demand of drugs. Never has had no effect on it historically, and that's unlikely to change. The cartels also, we also have our favorite cartels. There's a general, a Mexican general, who was going on trial for trafficking in Brooklyn because he was protecting a Pacific Coast cartel while he was doing the bidding of the DEA. And, he got off because there's some cartels that are more equal than others. And that's surely going on right now. How do we find El Mencho? We get the other cartels to rat him out. I mean, that's how it's worked. So the idea that this is like an effort to control the drug supply in the United States, it's not. I mean, nobody who's doing this thing, I mean, they talk about that, but there's no evidence that that's what's going to happen. Venezuela doesn't supply any fentanyl to the United States. None of it. There's zero evidence of that. It all comes through Mexico or other places. So, I think that's a sham. Those justifications for the drug war are a sham, and that those would be connected to, because some Israeli security consultants work with the cartels. That's not the basis of a geopolitical deal. I don't think that that's what's going on here. I think it's more like, just the domain of great powers. Putin thinks he can take Ukraine. We think we can take Mexico. China thinks they can take Taiwan. There's no such thing as international law. It's just, survival of the fittest. The devil take the hindmost. So I don't see those kind of bargains controlling what's going on here in these wars. Tim Harmon.
Jeff, I'm glad we're talking about all of this larger view and of things, but I wanted to ask if anyone knew something I just read in a book I heard about on last week's Zoom meeting, and it was a book by Peter Noyes called Legacy of Doubt. It was about Jim Braden and the assassination. He mentioned, and apparently he was a very good newsman. He was like a network newsman who had a really good reputation, Peter Noyes. I'd never heard of him, but he said there was a secret meeting, a hearing in the Senate in 1964, in which they sort of urgently reviewed some of the um, findings of the Warren Commission. Have you ever heard of that?
A secret meeting of the Senate? No.
It was a Senate committee, apparently.
You mean what's the name? Eastman's subcommittee?
He
I think
didn't.
there was allegedly there was some Senate subcommittee that held some hearing secretly. Yeah.
Well, I was just wondering if there are records of that we might be going after.
No, no.
I mean, unless you can identify an entity and a date that it happened, I mean, I can't help you.
Yeah.
Well, I'll try to find out if maybe I can find
Yeah.
some notes of Peter Noyes. But I also had one other thing that I ran into last week, and this is from a YouTube video, and you can never really evaluate the veracity and the value of any one video on YouTube. But, when Truman wrote his memo or not memo, op-ed piece in the Washington Post a month after the assassination, everyone said, well, look, he seems to think that there might have been something going on. According to a couple of YouTube videos I saw, he made comments to a number of his associates.
Well, never happened to Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
Yes.
I want to Larry has written a piece about those videos and fact checked them, and they're
We're
they're
we'll
not
be
factually
publishing it
supported.
soon.
Larry?
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll be-
it was those conversations were hallucinated. Some of them occurred. The people that allegedly he spoke to were already dead. So I kind of go through that. I go through each of the people that allegedly, there's no evidence. The timing of the op-ed piece is definitely curious, right?
Yeah.
But the claim that whatever thoughts he had about the assassination, he kept with him.
Okay.
Yeah, Tim, I should say, I know about this because I went to the Truman Library in November and spent 3 days researching how and why Harry Truman wrote that article. And what the people say in those videos is not supported by what is in the Truman Library.
Wow. Okay.
And Larry's going to have a piece about this on JFK Facts. So there is a way to evaluate what's on YouTube. Go to JFK Facts and we'll fact check it for you.
And Tim, if you read any of that dark history guy who that channel, it's AI. It's all AI, and everyone I've read so far, Truman was the biggest one, but there's other ones that they're there to get clicks. They're making money.
And Larry, you think it's slop? You think it's AI generated?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, they say that they claim they're doing AI generator research.
Well, I always try to approach that YouTube with a big grain of salt, but they were using names, as you know. I mean, he mentioned.
Yeah, and we checked the names, and it's not true.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I went through every single name and how some people were dead and some people never had the conversation. He claimed he spoke to MacArthur. MacArthur wasn't in D.C. Two of the people that he said he was on the plane with, they were in D.C. Why would they be in Kansas City taking a plane back with him? It just.
Yeah. I mean, MacArthur and Truman got along so well, as we know.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Ben Cooper.
Yeah. I'm trying to unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. I listened to this program on NPR called The Daily, which is put out by the New York Times. It's a half hour, pretty much current events. And today's was Mark Mazzetti, and I forget the name of his associate at the New York Times. And they've done a deep dive into the Iran war. I guess maybe we should call it a special military operation. I think that would make Putin very happy. At any rate, they have asserted and I think they can support this, that this war was essentially presented to our fearless leader, whose name I try not to mention, almost as a fait accompli. Apparently, Netanyahu told him that, look, this is what we're going to do, but we can't make it work without your military power, your expertise and your power. But we're going to do it anyway. And so if you want it to work, you have to follow along. And so essentially, our foreign policy has now been delegated to Bibi Netanyahu.
I mean, I think the evidence supports that.
And one piece of evidence that I've noticed, I don't know if anybody else has, if you listen to the reports about missile strikes, particularly in Tehran, typically it was Israel doing those strikes. You hardly ever hear about American missile strikes. We're just following his lead. And then today's news that fearless leader has just said, well, a regime change, but anything you decide on, I want to be in control of. He's basically trying to become emperor of the world or something like that. Between that and his board of peace,
it's madness.
it is, and but he's now saying we're going to do regime change. We're going to find a Delcy Rodriguez, a la Venezuela, who can be our puppet, and we're going to control Iran now. And that will not work. It might work in Venezuela for a while, but it will not work in Iran for reasons that have already been stated here. So I just wanted to call people's attention to that. Did anybody get the name of Mazzetti's partner in this report? It's a hard to pronounce name.
Ronan Bergman.
Ronan Bergman.
Yeah.
Ronan Bergman. He
not
was
as
on
hard
the,
as I thought.
He was on the Daily with Mark today, I believe.
Yeah. And I think Ronan Bergman is an Israeli citizen. He's a very well-informed Israeli reporter. But let's hear from Moshe.
So I appreciate the efforts and the contributions of all the researchers. I'm just a consumer. I'm not a contributor, but I do have a comment at the end of my comments that on research methodology. I have to clarify who I am. I'm a dual citizen of the U.S. and Israel and a Zionist, and I actually worked for AIPAC back in 1971 when it was still run by Cy Kennan, who founded it back in the, I guess, 1950 or so. And I lived in Israel. I worked in Israel. I was in the military in Israel, though I was just a private, nothing special. I'd like to make some comments about the nuclear debate in Israel, because I think it's very apropos of what's going on in Iran now. Israel, it is said that Israel has atomic weapons, and I would prefer not to make a positive or negative comment about that, but it makes a lot of sense when people say that.
U.S. and Israel policy. U.S. and Israel policy is that no public official can comment on the very well-known fact that Israel has probably 80 nuclear weapons.
Well, that's a good point. In Israel, there was never a nuclear debate in Israel until very late in the game. That's because the military censorship in Israel would not allow any comments on atomic weapons. I'm going back to the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, but especially the 60s. They would, and the Israeli policy was what is called in the Hebrew aminut, which is translated as opacity. The idea being that you don't have an atomic weapon if you haven't done a public test that shows you can do it. That's the excuse, you might say. Israel has never said it has weapons. It's never held any kind of a test, though some people say there was a test in South Africa that was picked up by an American satellite, but that was not a public thing. So as far as the Israeli governments have been concerned, they've always said we will not be the first to introduce atomic weapons to the Middle East. That's a lot of blah, 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 but let's go to the internal debate in Israel. Here's a book that was published in America. It's called Israel and the Bomb by Avner Cohen, who's an Israeli who did research at Columbia University, and he gives what he says is the story of Israel's development of a nuclear capability. And he names some names even of people involved in the program.
Book quite heavily in my biography of James Angleton, and I interviewed Avner Cohen for it.
He's a very knowledgeable guy. And here's a book by a guy called Adam Raz. I doubt if this will ever be translated to English. It's called The Struggle for the Bomb. And it's about the internal debate in Israel, the political debate. I can say that the Israeli nuclear program supposedly began very early. Ben-Gurion, already before 1948, either in his diaries or writing somewhere else, expressed the opinion that Israel would need an atomic bomb because it could never achieve peace with the Arab states, and therefore it had to have a trump card to deter the Arabs.
Ben-Gurion's belief, and that was the challenge that JFK
yes, that was Ben-Gurion's position, and his two chief henchmen or students, Moshe Dayan and Shimon Peres, who Dayan was chief of staff of the army and later was minister of defense and foreign minister under Begin, and Peres in the Labor Party was in various ministerial positions. He was prime minister at one point, etc. They represent only one strand of Israeli thinking. Another strand of Israeli thinking was very opposed to the atomic option, as I guess we would call it. And the leading thinker of that strand of thinking was a man called Yigal Allon, who was the main hero of the 1948 war. And he wrote a book. In 1964, it was published, called A Curtain of Sand. I don't know if it was translated into English. A Curtain of Sand, in which he argued that Israel could defend itself with conventional means, and he gave all kinds of military reasons why there was no need for atomic weapons. But the Israeli public wasn't involved in all this. The Israeli parties even publicly were not involved in this. Someone has pointed out, I think it was Avner Cohen, that all the atomic programs in the Western world were undertaken without parliamentary authorization. In Britain, in America, in England, there was no debate, there was no decision. The powers that be, or the national security state, or whatever you want to call it, they decided we got to have the bomb, and they went ahead and they developed it. And after that, it was a fait accompli.
Somebody sent me a clipping from the Israeli press in 1963 about the conflict between Ben-Gurion and JFK. And that a sensitive issue had come up between the United States and Israel. But that's all they would say.
I can shed some light on that. I can shed some light on that. The Israeli nuclear program, according to Cohen and other sources, was fairly well advanced by the time JFK became president. And
exactly.
The CIA...
They were undertaking weapons development at Dimona, and Kennedy wanted on-site inspections at Dimona.
Right. Kennedy wanted on-site inspections, and eventually there were on-site inspections, I think, under Johnson. But the Israelis, well, let's just say that the Israelis practiced deception, and the American teams that went there did not see what they weren't supposed to see, and leave that at that. However, the CIA, relying on American intelligence capability, which included at least one nuclear physicist who wrote an opinion, came to the conclusion that the size of the reactor was such that its only purpose could be for producing plutonium, which would be used as the fuel in nuclear weapons. So America pretty much had concluded that Israel had nuclear weapons. But everybody agreed not to talk about it. And I think an important point that should be made is that the Israelis, assuming they have the weapons, never threatened anyone with them. They never admitted to having them. They never threatened anyone. They never it was something that was just not spoken about. In Israel, the nuclear debate was prevented to the extent that military censorship, up until when was I in Israel? In the 70s and 80s, up until the 80s maybe, you couldn't even publish in an Israeli newspaper article a quotation from a foreign journalist in Time magazine, for example, about nuclear developments in Israel. In other words, they suppressed the public debate. Now, I knew people who were involved in the 60s in a group called, in America, people don't know about it, well, I'm sure the CIA knows about it, called the Committee for the Denuclearization of the Middle East. That's my translation of it. And these were people who were against, they knew what was going on, but they couldn't speak about it because of censorship and some other considerations. And there was a debate going on in veiled language in the political world of Israel, but the public was not part of this. They couldn't understand what was going on. It was sort of like watching the shadows in Plato's cave, on the wall of Plato's cave. They didn't really know what was going on. But there was a debate, and in the end, what supposedly happened, I think according to Cohen in this book, Israel and the Bomb, was that whatever was Ben-Gurion wanted, he got. Or his heirs got, and the others sort of had to accept it. And then it was a new ball game in which, but there still was a debate. Now, I was at a meeting in the late 70s where I met with Yigal Allon. And it was a group of people, a political group. A lot of them were military officers, but at a low level in reserves. And he was speaking about important strategic decisions in Israel. And he spoke about a strategic decision that was made by Ben-Gurion before the 67 war, around 65, where there was a debate. And he was very careful with what he said. As I said, this whole idea of opacity is very important in Israel. So even to this group, which was made up of his supporters, we were all his supporters, he said there was a debate whether to add an armored division or to increase capability in the Air Force for a certain purpose. That's how we put it. And he said Dayan and Perez wanted not to add an armored division, but to increase the capability of the Air Force in a certain direction. Ben-Gurion, whatever his reasons, ruled against it. And so Israel had another armored division, and this was basically following Allon's approach that with conventional forces, Israel, because of its technological superiority, the superiority of its human capital, its short internal supply lines, and various technical considerations, could defend itself against all the Arab armies without nuclear weapons. And indeed, in 1967, Israel proved that it could. And you might think that would have ended an internal debate about nuclear weapons. But the trouble is, in politics and in life, there's such a thing as a fait accompli. And so now you have a certain situation where we still have this nuclear opacity. And I think that the debate went on and goes on. I personally could not imagine Israel using a nuclear weapon. Yeah.
Moshe, thanks for your
Ever.
thoughts.
I do have a question for you, Jeff and Larry, and forgive me because I wasn't on recently, and if this is throwing a wrench in this discussion, forgive me. But how are things going on getting documents from Representative Luna, and is the CIA just basically stonewalling and we've hit a dead end, or is there any hope out there for any more documents to be released?
Well, I spoke to her chief of staff last week, and he re-forwarded our list to the attorney on the staff of the Oversight Committee, who is interacting with the CIA. I don't know why Luna, I think she's been kind of busy. So, I don't know. I don't know, Jeff, if you heard anything. It sounds like they're kind of coming to a close.
Yeah, I have not been in touch with Luna, so I don't have anything to add. I don't know any more than what, than what I've reported.
But I'm still pushing, and Luna's going to write a letter. I have to draft a letter for Luna to send to Bondi to try to get some of the sealed materials unsealed. But that whole task force is consumed right now with Epstein.
Yeah.
I don't see any bandwidth for JFK right now.
Yeah, I think that's the political reality. Okay, everybody, we've been here for an hour and a half, so time to wrap it up. Thank you, and join us again next week. We look forward to talking to you. Hey, everybody, I wanted to call your attention to one surefire way to deepen your knowledge of the assassination of President Kennedy. And that's to read my 3 books about the CIA, a trilogy of spies that tells how the assassination actually unfolded in the eyes of CIA insiders. You see, my work on JFK's assassination is rooted not in the literature of conspiracy, but in the history of CIA operations. And that makes all the difference when it comes to understanding the events that culminated on November 22nd, 1963. You'll want to check out my 3 CIA books that tell the story of the founding generation of the Central Intelligence Agency and what 3 insiders actually thought about JFK's assassination. Meet charismatic Station Chief Winston Scott as he surveils Lee Harvey Oswald 6 weeks before Dallas. Meet urbane CIA Director Richard Helms as he fends off President Richard Nixon's attempts to blackmail him over JFK's assassination. Meet James Angleton, the ingenious, paranoid, and sinister counterintelligence chief who had controlled the agency's file on Oswald since 1959. In these books, you'll see the real historical foundation of the events that led to President Kennedy's assassination, and you'll understand this event in a much deeper way. Check out my books at jeffersonmorleybooks.com. You can buy all of these books there, as well as my other nonfiction book, Snowstorm in August. So check out the Trilogy of Spies.